Hello and welcome to CBM Calling on this Friday. It is Friday, and I know for many of us, doesn't mean much anymore that it's a Friday. And so we are happy that it's Friday, though, and I think some of us still look forward to the weekend. So that's actually one of the questions we want to ask all of you today is, do you still look forward to Fridays, or does it really not matter too much to you anymore? One of our colleagues recently said she used to love Fridays, it was her favorite day of the week that she would look forward to. And now she looks forward to Mondays because she'll have something to do. So just wondering how all of you are feeling about Fridays. So happy to be joined today by Sharlene Craig. Some of you will recognize Sharlene. Sharlene and I were on together about 3 weeks ago. Sharlene, is that right?
Probably.
And we were talking about mental health and how to cope during this COVID-19 crisis and social isolation. And so today we're doing a follow-up, and in particular, we're focusing on fear and anxiety during these times. But before we get into that, I want to just remind people about Solidarity Sunday, which is the live event that we have coming on Sunday, May 3rd. So this coming Sunday. So you have something to look forward to for this Sunday. And
Mhm.
it's going to be at 4 p.m. Eastern time. So please join us for that. We're going to have people from all over the world that are participating in this. And I have a feeling it's going to be fantastic. So please do join us for Solidarity Sunday. So Charlene, I'm so happy to see you and glad to have you back on CBM Calling. How are you doing?
I'm doing all right, thanks.
That's great.
Yeah, it's good. Well,
Good. You know, the other day when we were chatting, I was saying to you that a couple of things that have really been popping up on all my feeds, and um, probably because I'm being monitored by my cell phone somehow, I'm being spied on by Google. But I've noticed there's a lot of posts about fear and anxiety. In particular, these two emotions are popping up in a lot of articles and a lot of things people are posting. And I'm wondering if it's because we're preparing to re-enter. We're already hearing about some provinces that are opening back up starting in May. And, you know, all of us are anxious to kind of wonder what's that going to be like, because we know we've been told and warned by our leaders it's not going to be like what it used to be.
yes.
And I think a lot of it is unknown. So are you surprised? I guess you're probably not, but I was a little, at how anxious people are actually feeling about this.
I think you're right. And no, I'm not surprised. And I have those same things coming up on my feeds. And it's actually some of those that I've been reading in preparation for talking today. But, I think first of all, there's kind of that layer of emotional fatigue. We've had a steep learning curve in the last 6 weeks, trying to figure out how to navigate life practically and process stuff emotionally. Um, and now we've kind of feel like we've gone from walking on solid ground to what feels like to me kind of being blindfolded on some kind of suspension bridge, and we don't know how long that bridge is. Um, and so, but in the last 6 weeks, we often talk about it takes 6 weeks to develop a habit. And I think we've actually kind of figured out a little bit how to do this. And so, your question about does today feel any different? Well, we've kind of figured out rhythms for the days.
Mhm.
Um, but then now everything's going to be new again. And so while we desperately want this freedom, it's kind of scary with the next phase coming of, what are the decisions we make? Um, and I think there's a lot of things connected with navigating this next phase. It's kind of like who will be safe to connect to? If will we be blamed if we somehow inadvertently get COVID and infect somebody? If we get to expand that bubble, who am I going to bubble with? And are people going to be offended if I choose one group instead of the other? Or does anybody care enough about me to want me in their bubble? It's like being choosing teams, and am I going to be the last person picked? I think uh, a lot of those things are kind of there, along with the financial stuff. Will my
Mhm.
job be the same? Will I have a job? How am I going to manage with those things? Um, it struck me that one of the key differences between what we have been going through and what we will be going through is that this first one, this lockdown, was imposed on us. It was a crisis thing. We all just did it. Our only real personal choice was how compliant we were going to be and how we were going to do that. But now, as things open, there'll be more personal choices required. Am I going to send my kid to school? Uh, am I going to go out to a grocery store or to a restaurant or something along that line? And we don't really have great criteria on which to make those decisions. And so I think that's anxiety producing.
It's interesting how being at home has now become symbolic of being safe.
Yes.
That anything outside of my house,
Yes.
I'm in danger. And
Hmm.
that's been an interesting rise. I'm sure, I'm sure some people have felt that before. It's like, oh, the relief of coming home after a long trip or something like that, the comfort of
Right.
it. But now it's almost like this fear, like if I step outside of my house, it is like I'm going into, danger. And I mean, we're all armed with our masks and our
Yes.
gloves and all these other things that just say, you know, I'm stepping into this whole, scary place that is so unfamiliar to me, which is a
And one
really
of the weird things is even just wearing a mask, you can't see
mm,
people as well.
it's
You can't
true.
see their facial expressions or their smile or anything else. And that adds another little layer.
The reluctance to even talk to each other or to make eye
Exactly.
contact with each other.
Yeah.
Even through those masks, sometimes it's hard. If I'm wearing glasses, they steam up when I go inside the store with my mask, and I'm
And
like,
I
I'm not
kind of
trying
have
to
to
avoid
shout.
eye contact. I really can't see you.
Exactly. And I have to shout because you're 6 feet away
That's right.
through my mask.
Exactly. It's
Yeah.
these emotions, fear and anxiety, are two emotions that I think about when I was growing up, and I grew up in a Christian environment, so I've pretty
Hmm.
much been in that church environment most of my life. No one ever talked about those emotions.
Hmm.
Somehow, if you expressed that you were feeling depressed or if you were feeling fearful about something, it was somehow correlated with you're not trusting in God enough. That somehow
Right.
it's almost unbiblical that you would have these emotions because they're supposed to be negative emotions. And yet I think now we're really I think that's changed really. I think the landscape is changing. We feel a lot safer to express these things and realize that it's really not unchristian of us to feel that way. We're human.
Exactly. Exactly. And I really think that's growth. Um, I used to say, who wakes up in the morning and says, I wonder what feeling I'll choose today? Should I choose being angry or anxious or sad or, oh, I think I'll pick anxious. Like it's not like we have control
Mhm.
over these things. They're just feelings. And then they come up. And then our question is, what do we do with those feelings? Um, and I think, when we talk about fear and anxiety and those kinds of things, like this, I think it's helpful to kind of differentiate between those to some degree. I mean, I
Mhm.
think oftentimes people talk, when you think about anxiety, it's often kind of this generalized feeling of pending doom or something that's happening. You can't really often kind of name it. It's just kind of this amorphous thing. Whereas a fear is usually something about something specific. And so even differentiating those things. And when I think just a little bit, but again, when I think about, it's normal and actually kind of healthy to have a certain level of fear or anxiety. um, if you think about starting a new job, you're a bit anxious about that because it's something new. You drive into a new city and you're trying to find an address. There's a bit of anxiety of, okay, this is new, how do I manage this? And so all of those things are normal and reasonable. It's when it starts to get to the point where it impairs your function, that it becomes a concern. And I think we're all different in how we respond to situations like this. Some people are comfortable with change, navigate that easily. Some people are naturally positive and kind of just assume everything will work out. Others think about, they want to be prepared for possible scenarios, and others are just kind of natural worriers. Um, and I think right now, it's because of the unknowns, it's not hard to kind of spiral into some of that catastrophizing. And that's the part we want to avoid.
For sure.
Um, yeah.
Good advice. I shared with you that I had heard this podcast recently from Regent College, and it was Ron
Hmm.
Wilson, who I've never met, but I would like to because he's just so wise, and he shares about
Very.
his own. He talks about mental health in it,
Hmm.
and we can put the link on below for people who want to go take a listen to that, because it really is so well done, what he says. But he makes the distinction between being worried, in that it occupies every thought that you have, it
Yes.
debilitates you, to not
Yes.
be able to do anything, and just, being anxious about something in a
Hmm.
on a normal, healthy way, which most
Right.
of us feel on any given day about anything, like, oh, what am I going to eat for dinner? I have nothing in
Yeah.
the house.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
feel slightly anxious, but I wasn't thinking about it the whole day, right?
Right.
So it's a there's a healthy balance, I think, right, between
Yes.
those emotions, and they aren't necessarily negative things.
That's
They're
right.
just
That's
normal
right.
feelings.
That's right. Yeah.
So I'm
Yeah.
wondering, what are some good choices that we can be making now, as we're all starting to think about reentry and what that's going to be like? What do you think are some good things we could be doing just to help ourselves
Mhm.
prepare?
Mhm. Well, one of the things that strikes me really around any of these fear kinds of things is to kind of start with saying, assess the validity of it. Stop and actually take some time to figure
Mm,
out what is it that I'm feeling anxious about, um, and to translate that kind of generalized stuff into actual things. And I think sometimes we are scared to do that. That if we name them, they'll become bigger. But
mm,
actually, I think it's the opposite. That if you actually say, this is the thing that I'm really concerned about, then it takes away some of the power of it, and it lets you start to process how to manage them. Um, and how to manage them, one of those steps is really, try to assess, is this a legitimate concern? What are my information sources around this, and are they reliable? Who or what is feeding this fear? Um, it might be too much time online. It might be some people that, your family or friends or whatever that you're talking to, that you can just tell your anxiety goes up.
mm,
Um, I know there are a couple of people that I'm pretty much guaranteed that by about the fourth sentence, they will have said something that's not helpful to me.
mm,
It can just, oh, the markets are crazy. We're going to have to live on a quarter of our income or whatever. It's like, it's not a fact. It's not helpful. And to say it over and over again, no, not good. And so it may involve kind of stepping away from some of those people for a while, or limiting the conversation
mm,
about that. Um, it might be too that it's some previous experience has triggered some reaction, and to kind of recognize that, um, or what are all the what ifs that I'm filling in this story that may or may not be valid at all. Um, and I know I have been at different situations in my life where it was hard for me to do that assessment. So I think the second
mm,
thing is, who can give me perspective and help me with this? So, is there someone who I know who has a history of being pretty stable and great, objective, that I could talk to help me with
mm,
this?
mm,
A trusted friend, or, maybe a pastor who knows some of my triggers too.
mm,
Um, Maybe it's actually calling a government office to
mm,
find out, verify some rumor that you've heard. Um, and then I think the other piece that's often the case is kind of reminding myself of the full story. The news, the job of the news is to point out kind of problems and exceptions. So right now, and please don't hear me as invalidating or making light of any of the deaths related to this, but we hear a lot about the people who have died. We hear less about the people who have recovered. And
mhm,
we also hear much less about the fact that it's still only a very tiny percentage of people who are actually affected or infected by COVID.
mhm.
And so it's just that whole bigger picture, I think, that's
Mm.
important.
Having
Um,
a good perspective.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
Mhm,
And then when you kind of figured out what some of those things are that are valid or that are concerns, I think, kind of thinking ahead about, okay, so if these are some of the issues, what, how can I make a good decision about it? Like, what are some of the factors that would be involved in making those decisions? Like,
mm,
is it it's my priority, kind of my family's well-being, or can I actually be honest and say, am I able to give support right now, or do I actually need it, and what would that look like?
mm, mm,
And then making decisions about what are some what would have the most positive impact. you know Maybe I'm the introvert in the family, and I don't have as much need to connect with people, but I know my siblings really do, so to kind of give them permission to bubble,
mm, mhm,
um, or just some of those kinds of things. And I think sometimes it's also helpful just to write down, okay, this is the fear, this is some of the decisions that I'm probably going to need to make, and do some pros and cons, or strategies um, that help to prepare you, but not going back to it over and over and over again to revise those strategies unless something significant changes. Like put it aside, you've done what you could to prepare. And then there's also some of those things that are just not valid to give any attention to, and to just stop and say, I'm not going down this what if worst case scenario. There's no value in it. I'm not being a good steward of my time and energy, and it's unhealthy. So not going there. That's not easy, but it's an important thing.
I have found for myself, there's just negative voices that
Yes.
as you mentioned, those people who they're going to say something not going to be good for you to hear. And I have just found tuning out those negative voices even for this time period.
Yes.
So for me, I've had to secretly unfollow a few people on Facebook, and I love those people.
Yes.
I really can't read their posts anymore because the negativity from every one of their posts was actually overwhelming for me. It was causing me to have emotions I wouldn't otherwise have about things that I maybe would felt very neutrally about beforehand. So I thought, what, just for now, I think I'm going to need to take a more positive view on this, and I'm not going to follow them for right now. But it doesn't mean I love them any less.
And I think, not as hard to do on Facebook if it's, a family member or whatever who you care about and have more you're trying to support. I think it's fair to say
it's hard.
You're let's change the subject because I don't find that very helpful right now for me.
Sure.
You don't have to tell them it's not helpful for them.
No, that's right.
I think it's okay to set some boundaries around that, and have another topic in mind that you can switch to.
So a word that I really love is resiliency. And I feel like this is one of my life goals, and I think yours as well, is just how do we build resiliency in ourselves spiritually and emotionally, I would say physically as well. I'm trying to how do we build that resiliency as people of faith? What does that look like?
Well, and I think, if you Google any of this stuff, there are always, and talk to people, there are common themes, right? Just in terms of basics for everybody, is about, good overall health. God gave us our bodies. How do we look after them? Exercise, eating well, getting enough sleep, those kinds of things, getting out into nature. That is one thing we can still do. And I think now with spring and the flowers and all of those kinds of things, for me, it's always, I remember, the one verse from the hymn, Great is Thy Faithfulness, that talks about even, the seasons that are examples of God's faithfulness and order in our lives, the way He's created the world. Similarly, I think just creating, routines and structures that in our lives that will create some order and stability. Doing something we enjoy that brings delight in some way. Maybe it's trying your hand at painting or joining the sourdough craze or something. And finding places where we can create more choice. Even if they're tiny choices. Choice always gives us the feeling of having some control. So I think those are just general things for anybody. And then, as people of faith, I think there are those other spiritual practices, some rhythms of silence and solitude where we can just be with God, because it's a good thing, not because it's a useful thing, but just because it's a good thing. It's not to inspire it's not to induce guilt, but to be inspired and encouraged. A lot of us are walking. So how do you turn that into a prayer walk? And, think about ways you can bless your neighbors in that. Again, notice nature, just be there. The whole gratitude thing, shifting our lens again from those negative Facebook posts to some positive things, and just, again, not because it's going to fix something or to get us something. It doesn't negate or cancel our fears and anxieties, but it shifts our focus and makes it good. I think being in community, again, finding people to do this together with, that's the way God created us. Finding ways to bless others. I think one of the things that about this whole COVID thing is that we feel helpless a lot of the time. And so doing something to help others helps us to gain a sense of purpose and meaning, and again, some control over our actions. I think,
I'm wondering, so the last question I have for you is if you've gone through all that, you've taken the time to take an inventory, do self-reflection on what you're experiencing and what you're feeling, and yet
Mhm.
you feel like you need help to process it. Where are some places people can go to seek help? You've mentioned a few things. Do you have any other suggestions of where people could find some resources or what
Mhm.
are some things people could read or listen to that could help?
Well, I think again, when we talk about what are reliable sources, that's important. And so certainly, there are a number of very reliable, websites from government around anxiety and fears and managing those kinds of things. Uh, some businesses and companies would have an employee assistance program that's likely very equipped for this. The Canadian Mental Health Association would have resources around that as well. Um, I think you're going to post this website. I have found an organization called Grace Alliance, which offers some really good, well-researched and biblical approaches around mental health,
Mm,
and that balances both the biblical perspective and the neurological science kind of piece of it.
mm,
Um, and then, again, depending on kind of your specific need, there's a lot of great podcasts of people who
mm,
are
mhm.
are uh, processing this with us. And I don't know that I want to endorse any particular one while we're live, but if any individual would like some ideas around that, I certainly would be happy to share.
Yes,
So,
and we do want to post some of these links that we've referred to, places that you could go. We if anything that we want people to take away from this is that you are not alone. And
exactly.
what you are feeling, you are not the only person who is feeling that. We are all in this together, and there are many places that you can go to find people who will help walk alongside you. And so I hope that is the one takeaway
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
people will have.
One last thing, if I may. Um, Beth Moore, who is a well-known preacher and author,
Hmm.
has a great image. I think she talks about, in scripture, there are several times when Jesus says, take courage. So when Jesus is walking out on the water and the disciples think he's a ghost, he says to them, take courage. It's not, it's I, don't be afraid. And that image of take courage, not have courage,
Mm,
take courage. And so she talks about kind of viewing it as though Jesus is there offering courage.
mhm,
So how can we take courage in this moment? Because he is always
mm.
with us. And I think I really appreciate that image.
That's a lovely, lovely place for us to end our conversation today, and a lovely image, I think, for us to take away from today. So we want to just say hello to a few people that have been
Mhm.
joining us for this, and of course, Susanna Nacho. Always good to hear from
Oh,
Susanna. She says
hi,
she
Susanna.
Friday means 2 days of break from homeschooling. So
Aha, excellent.
yes, that is true. That's fantastic. And also Daryl and Laura Lee Buston,
Hmm.
our colleagues, and they say we still like Fridays, although they have to work a lot of Sundays,
Yes, that's true.
but they still like Fridays. And Estella Ing, thank you to
Ah,
Estella,
yes.
loyally watching our broadcasts, and she says hello
Hmm.
to Charlene. And Randy Stanton, our colleague, says he still loves Fridays as well. And he also works on Sundays and Saturdays sometimes. So,
Oh,
and then Jeff Efford says hello to everyone as well. So thank you so much for everyone for joining us today. We
mhm.
do want to remind people that we will not be broadcasting on Monday. We actually have a break on Monday. But on Tuesday, we will be back with Michael Waddell and Brenda Hulk and myself, actually. And we're going to be talking about marketplace ministries. And so that should be a good conversation. And just one last reminder, Solidarity Sunday coming this Sunday at 4 p.m. Join us live 4 p.m. this Sunday here on Facebook or on our website, cbmen.org. Thank you so much
Looking
to everyone
forward
for
to it.
watching. And thank you, Sharlene, for joining me today.